Hi, I'm Cara Lesser, founder and executive director of Kid Museum. Welcome to Kid Museum's first Futurist interview. Now more than ever, we need to get more innovative learning experiences into kids' hands to help them recover from the pandemic and leapfrog forward. As we think about ways that we can accelerate this work, we're excited today to hear from two innovative leaders in the field. Please join me in welcoming Gregg Behr, Executive Director of the Gregg Behr Foundation, and Dr. Shanika Hope, Director of Education Outreach at Google and Kid Museum Board Member. We're looking forward to hearing from them insights about what we can do now to help kids develop the skills they need to succeed and thrive in the future. With thanks to Gregg and Shanika and to all of you for joining us for this conversation, let me turn it now to Dr. Hope.
Gregg, I am thrilled to be here with you today to have this conversation about maker learning. I'm curious, in your work with Remake Learning, you've brought to light the importance of these efforts to approach instruction with our students, both inside and outside the classroom, in a way to really accelerate compassion, creativity, collaboration with our students. Why do we need this type of focus on these kinds of learning experiences right now?
Well, the good news as we sit in 2021 is that Remake Learning as a network here in Southwestern Pennsylvania consists of more than 600 schools, museums, libraries, early learning centers, after-school programs, campuses of higher education, creative industries, collectively thinking about what is relevant, what is engaging, what is equitable and just as we think about learning opportunities for kids in and out of school from the earliest years through their formative years. And so the state of where we are is ever better, I believe. And certainly this pandemic calls us to be ever better in a post-pandemic learner future. When we think about the mindsets, when we think about the dispositions and the knowledge that kids will need for themselves as they navigate their own economic futures, as they become engaged citizens, as they are individuals capable of solving some really wicked challenges and problems in their own communities and around this globe, well, then we're going to need to call upon the skills of creativity and connectivity and collaboration and curiosity to really unpack and notice what's happening, and then equip them with the skills to work together to solve these problems. Kids spend about 14 to 20% of their waking hour in a school building. Well, what happens in that other 80%? When they're in a museum, when they're at home, when they're in a library or an after-school program. And the whole challenge of Remake Learning and the question that we've taken upon ourselves is, how can we make our region a learning landscape?
Yeah, I love that idea of a learning landscape. And your remarks touched on a really important part is, look, we all play a role, whether it's the library, the museums, we all play a role, industry, in helping our students to prepare for the future, right? And you touched on this idea that, our nation, the world, our global community is coming and emerging out of this pandemic. And this idea of these skills, these habits, these mindsets that our kids have to be able to demonstrate, resilience, persistence, grit. How does maker learning as an approach address this kind of absolute urgent moment of need for our children and their education as we try to equip them and ready them for a world that has a lot of unknowns for us?
At its core, maker learning is about noticing and about wondering, right? And if we give kids educational settings where they feel like they belong, where their big questions are respected, where they feel safe and comfortable, and then can couple that with hands-on real world learning that connects to them, connects to their passions and interests. And we can do that not only in maker-centered learning, but we can also do it in STEM and STEAM learning, in technology-enhanced learning. It's leaning into the pedagogy that's right for us as teachers, as institutions like museums, like the Kid Museum. If we lean into that pedagogy, like maker-centered learning, and really create environments where kids are beginning to notice what's happening, and taking the time to struggle through what it is that they're noticing, and they're supported by all sorts of caring adults in that, and then can start to geek out and mess around and really think about, like, what would I do with that? How would I approach that problem? What could we invent to solve that? That's the brilliance of those settings. And Kids with those sorts of wonderings, equipped with caring adults, and then nurturing and growing those skills, are the very types of future adults that will address the wicked challenges that come after this pandemic.
As someone that is constantly examining this problem, certainly through an industry lens, and saying, look, the kinds of skills we need from students and learners 10 years from now, they really lean into a lot of the soft skills that we talk a lot about today. If you could paint a picture by providing us with a specific example of a collaboration and or a partnership that you've been a part of that's helped to create and set the right environment and cultivate that for children to learn. Give us an example of a really effective collaboration that you've been a part of.
Happily, I can turn to dozens of examples. So let me turn to one example, the Carnegie Libraries in Pittsburgh, founded by Andrew Carnegie himself more than a century ago. And the type of institution that 10, 15 years ago people said was dead. Teenagers these days don't care about the libraries. Our libraries don't matter anymore, right? We heard a lot of that. Well, the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh worked very closely with the Entertainment Technology Center at Carnegie Mellon University to reimagine the environment of their teen library spaces, and drawing upon the learning science coming from their own institution at Carnegie Mellon and also elsewhere. And they changed the environment physically. Furniture, color, the types of materials. Yes, there are now books in those teen spaces, but also all sorts of maker tools, gaming, guitars. And they also thought about the people in those spaces, right? The people matter. We still need librarians because there's still books in this environment. But what if we partnered with hip hop artists? What if we partnered with gamers? What if we partnered with technologists and industry representatives from Google or other companies and brought them into these spaces? What would that look like? Well, it looks a lot like the work of Mimi Ito out of the University of Cal Irvine, who uses what is a familiar acronym now that she calls HAMAGO, the letter standing for hang out, mess around, geek out. I mention that example because the Carnegie Libraries of Pittsburgh, which predominantly serves an urban student population here in Pittsburgh that's mostly Black students, they saw a twofold increase of students coming back into the library spaces because they were attracted to the spaces. They were places they felt they belonged, where they wanted to be. And then if they wanted to start to mess around and geek out, they were supported by all sorts of caring adults. And do you know, Dr. Hope, the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh saw an 18% increase in book circulation among a teen population and teens in general. To me, that's just a beautiful example of an institution working with higher education, then working with educational partners. It's become a site of professional development in working with fellow museums in the region, working with schools in the region, and it's become a hub and a lighthouse about what's possible when we apply the learning sciences and who today's kids are and where they need to go and how we best support them as the grown-ups in their lives.
I love how you pointed out that in this particular example, that brown and Black children, those individual or student groups that may historically be marginalized or underserved, how they thrived in this type of a collaboration. Everything that you said made me think about how by setting the stage of an inclusive environment, by providing learning that's engaging, that is learner-centered, that also helps students to take risks and to feel comfortable not having the answers and failing fast. That's something that we talk a lot about in industry as we look at candidates for various roles and careers. What do you say to stakeholders that are like, you know what, that looks like a bunch of play. I can't measure that on the assessments that I'm held accountable for?
Well, one, we give them real life examples. So I talk often about a school district here in southwestern Pennsylvania called the Elizabeth Ford School District. It's a school district that over the past decade has invested significantly in maker-centered learning and digital fabrication, among other things. And it's prompted them to rethink their budget, to rethink their professional development, to rethink their design of spaces. And Dr. Hope, I can tell you the results in that school district are these: an increase in math scores, an increase in reading scores, a dropout rate that's gone from 25 or 30 a year to now 0 or 1 a year. Enrollment in the school that where charter enrollment has dropped by 2/3 because kids want to be and their families want to be back in that public school setting. So one, we need to give people results. Two, I think we show them, right? It's a matter of getting parents and families and also our policymakers in these settings where they can see kids light up, right? Because if you can see a setting where a child is lit up by computational thinking or lit up by maker-centered learning or lit up by something that's not part of our own experience, that's a powerful experience for us as adults. It's in part why we launched Remake Learning Days. And we're so honored that the DMV, through the Kid Museum, is part of Remake Learning Days this year.
So Gregg, you talked about that there are opportunities for K-12 learning coming out of the pandemic. Could you speak to what those specific opportunities are? And then connected to that, with these opportunities, how do we think about linking what are sometimes called soft skills, so curiosity, collaboration, compassion? How do we think about linking those skills to the fundamentals of reading, writing, arithmetic, science, which students have missed out on this past year?
We've got so many opportunities ahead and so many concrete opportunities. I heard a superintendent say just recently, we have had to personalize learning this past year like no other year. She's noted that their school district has rocketed forward 5 or 10 years in this past year from where she thought they might be. And the ways in which they've used technology-enhanced learning to support that, and then the professional development and training for teachers in their classrooms. That's a powerful example of them thinking about, well, what does it really mean to personalize learning? We've got a school district in our region that they really are thinking about a moonshot as they move ahead in this next year. And their moonshot is to take individual education plans, which have largely been used to support special education populations, and create IEPs universally for every student in their school district. That really forces schools and the teachers to think about very differentiated, very personalized educational opportunities that link directly to academic, but also the social and emotional outcomes for every single one of their students. That's one example. I think second, we can think so much differently about family and caregiver engagement. How do schools, but also museums and libraries, think differently about engaging with parents and families going forward? And third, I turn back to this whole idea of deep and personal relationships. What if schools had directors of relationships whose sole responsibility is to help every kid, particularly the often marginalized or overlooked kids, build their social network in a way that they can start seeing themselves in many opportunities, start to build personal relationships with actual people and organizations in the world so that they can expand their opportunities and imagine bigger about what it is that they might pursue. There are some very concrete things that aren't hard to think about that would be life-changing if we actually made real in this world and invested in and made happen in support of our kids.
In our last question, Gregg, and this conversation went extremely fast. In your book, Fred Rogers talked about the beginning of something else.
Yeah.
You celebrate this idea by naming the epilogue of your book, The Beginning of Something Else. Where do you think we can go in Remake Learning from here? What should we do next?
We should fiercely, powerfully pursue a genuine renaissance of learning. Fred Rogers, 50 years ago, left us blueprints for learning that are incredibly relevant and radical for 2021 as we look into a post-pandemic future in the years ahead. And he did that by doing two things. By combining what today we would call whole child development theory and practice, right? He didn't call it that. And the titans of child development with whom he studied, like Benjamin Spock and Erik Erikson and Margaret McFarland, didn't call it that. But he understood the whole child and what was timeless and classic about deep and caring relationships and the role of us as grown-ups, as the adults in their lives. And he combined that with learning science, right? I don't think we think about Fred Rogers as a learning scientist, and he was. And we need to appreciate how deliberate and intentional he was, and how he took the new technology of his day, the newfangled television, right? And he said, this is attractive to young people. How do we make what's attractive, constructive, and good? And Fred Rogers beautifully blended timeless and classic child development, whole child practice with the learning sciences and what it is that we need to do for our kids. And if we can marry those two things in brilliant ways, we'll do brilliant things for our kids.
Well, on that note, I am ready to join you. I lock arms with you as we look to just amplify and really beat the drum of the importance of this kind of work. So, Gregg, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with me today. It's invaluable for us to learn and to talk about how we can take action to rebound from the learning loss of the pandemic, rebuild education experience to build the 21st century workforce, and ultimately remake how we prepare children for a better future and a better world. This is a pivotal moment in education, as we talked about today. Hands-on maker learning experiences, both in and outside of school, provide essential skills in critical thinking, creativity, and collaboration. Getting innovative learning in the hands of teachers and students is imperative to address the inequities in our young people's educational experience. At Kid Museum, we work to bring these skills to life through meaningful maker experiences that reaches populations that are often historically marginalized or underserved. We believe it takes a strong network of support, a larger ecosystem, and community to work together to get solutions moving. We hope you'll join us in bringing some of these actions and activities to life for all students to help our children to build a better future and a better world. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. And who better to lead us forward than Dr. Hope? I'm getting right in line. Thank you.
Alongside with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.